these lectures are recorded, and the reason why I have you off is because, you know, I don't know. I don't want to hear you lot moaning. Anyway, so today we're going to do the Incas. Now, we're going to do the collapse of the Incan Empire. And the one thing I'd like to ask you, Drina, if there were 3 things that you could say about the Incan Empire, what would they be?
Fantastic stonework.
Nice, that's
big
in front
temples.
of you. Yep.
Do they have, I hesitate to call them cartoon drawings, but do they, that style?
Now, that's a rather interesting one because lots of their artwork is associated with their gold, and lots of their gold has been since melted down by the Spaniards. Now,
Yeah.
One thing I'm going to say at the head of this lecture is that even though I will be saying it, because I'm going to try to be unbiased, but it was not the conquistadors that destroyed the Incan civilization. That's at the top of this. The other thing I would like to mention is that the Incan army was probably too weak by about 1532 when Francisco Pizarro got there to be any opposition to the Spanish. It's likely at the end of doing 5 lectures this week on the Incas that the conclusion must be said that the destruction of the Incan Empire has to be at the hands of the Incans themselves, and secondly, at the hands of diseases from the world of Europe, the old world to the new world. So one thing that we can clearly see with this image straight away is the pristineness of the stonework. This could probably be dated to about 1450. The stonework from the earlier Incan world, from about 1230 onwards, is a lot larger than this, and even this stonework from the beginning of the height of the Incan Empire is the type of stonework that you can't put a knife or credit card in between the joints. So let's start with this. The Incan Empire came to an end when it was conquered by the Spanish Empire. No, the empire was actually already weak when they arrived, as the Inca were in civil war fought between Uyscar and Atahualpa over the succession of the imperial throne. It's taken me all week to pronounce Atahualpa. I had to even go on YouTube to get somebody to help me to pronounce it. So when we talk about Atahualpa, we talk about somebody who comes to the throne of the Incan Empire when the Incan Empire, most of its towns and cities are in ruins because of this constant civil war. Lots of historians and archaeologists would say that the Incan army numbered in the hundreds of thousands. That's simply not possible. It was impossible to put a field army out more than a few thousand across the plains of the Incan world because it's so hilly and mountainous that you can't imagine large field armies fighting across the Incan terrain. However, it will be argued the following. It's said that Atahualpa was made aware of 168 men who accompanied Francisco Pizarro, one of 4 brothers. And these 168 men had 62 horses, iron armor, swords, and hand cannons, otherwise known as the modern-day muskets. They also had a few artillery pieces as well. Now, I've got to say that it's always remarked that the large land armies of the Inca were overcome quite quickly by Pizarro and his army. But it's highly unlikely. And I'm saying that my sound isn't good. Is my sound good with you, Drina?
It's a bit crackly, but I can tell what you're saying.
Okay, is my sound good now?
That's better, yes. Yeah.
Okay, I could take these off then. Okay, so that's better, is it?
Yes, much better, thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad Anne warned me. Right, so here we go. Francisco Pizarro and his army. It said they marched inland, and we'll show you where in a few moments, to a place called Cajamarca. And when he got to Cajamarca, it was decided that he was to send out a message to Atahualpa and they were to meet. And Pizarro had said to Atahualpa, the emperor who had won the civil war in 1532, they'd only come in peace. Atahualpa was warned that Pizarro was of the devil. Pizarro should not be trusted. In fact, the Spanish were not welcomed this time as heroes. They were not welcomed this time as gods, as Montezuma had welcomed them in 1521 on the coastline. Hang on, got somebody else added. On the coastline of Central America. This was a different undertaking. So why, therefore, was Atahualpa's advisors, his generals, saying, don't trust Francisco Pizarro? Now that's a clue. That is a clue. Why would they say that? Don't trust him. And I think the clue is that over the course of 1521 to 1532, there'd already been considerable contact between the Incan and the Spanish Spanish conquistadors who had conquered the Aztec world. They were trading back and forth. And with that trade, alongside the civil war that the Inca were involved in, that brought typhus, influenza, smallpox, and a variety of other bacteriums and viruses. That being said, Atahualpa decided to disregard what his advisors were saying. Atahualpa met at Cajamarca. And Cajamarca would have been a location that at this point would have been in ruins. So what I'd like to do, to give you a sort of an idea where we need to go, we'll go back to that image. Let's go back, let's go and show you a little bit of a plan. You're looking at some really nice masonry. Another site that we'll look at, Machu Picchu, in a tiny bit of detail. And hopefully we'll have a bit of a map coming up. There it is. Now, Cajamarca is basically where my stylus is on the board. Now, this was a peaceful conference. And on the 15th of November, the Spanish met with Atahualpa at Cajamarca. It's described by the Catholic priests of the day that Atahualpa was good-natured, he was hospitable, and he was learned. However, Atahualpa left behind his army, and he asked for his army to be disarmed. In the ensuing meeting, Francisco Pizarro massacred, it said, 6,000 of Atahualpa's soldiers. 6,000. Now, at that point, I start to disbelieve what I'm reading. At Cajamarca, Atahualpa was taken hostage by Francisco Pizarro. And folks, why am I not believing that 160 odd men and their 62 horses could wipe out an army of 6,000? Why am I not believing that? Why am I disbelieving the history that's written down by the Spanish priests? In all of history that I've studied, when you look at a dower towards the end of the 1800s, when the Italians invaded Ethiopia, they faced an Ethiopian army with spears, where the Italian army, with all their technology, lost that battle. In fact, the Italians didn't even make a decent, credible retreat. The Italian army was wiped out by a load of individuals brandishing spears. That's one point. At Islandawana, the British army was thankfully wiped out, more or less to a man, in 1879. I think I've got the date right there. Bill can correct me on that one. At Islandawana, for example, the British army of some 1,700 faced a Zulu army of 20,000. The Zulu army wiped out the British army more or less to a man, with only about 30 individuals surviving. Equally, the Zulu were armed with nothing more than spears and shields, but they still overcome. the British army of Islandawana. And the British army of Islandawana were armed far better than these conquistadors. And you look at the likes of Little Bighorn and so on and so on. So it's inconceivable that 6,000 of Atahualpa's soldiers were massacred by a very small group of soldiers associated with Pizarro. And then you start to think that the real history of what was exactly happening is not what's down on paper. So if we go back and we look at those, a couple of images, that there is the site of Machu Picchu, which was discovered by Hiram Bingham in 1911. This site, described by Hiram Bingham in 1911, was the last refuge of the kings of the Inca. It's been doubted. And the reason why it's been doubted is this looked like a normal sort of hidden town. It had nothing really credible that sort of linked it to the kings of the Inca, but it was still an Incan settlement. But because Harold Bingham found this site completely isolated and untouched by the Spanish, he presumed that this was the last refuge of the Inca leaders. Maybe it wasn't there at all. Maybe it was another site known as Villa Cabamba, which is more towards the south of Machu Picchu. I'm bringing in lots of other points as well. One thing, when somebody mentioned hieroglyphs and all the rest of it, their carvings, I'm more interested in how the Spanish portrayed the Inca. And this is obviously from a Spanish woodcut. From what we do know, back to the very beginning of this lecture, back to the first image, if it's going to come up. Hang on a minute, folks. Whilst we're waiting for that image, just a reminder of the link for tomorrow. We do have problems with the images a minute, so I'll just continue talking. So most, it's said, of the Incan army was back in Cuzco, which is in the heart of the Incan kingdom, if you think back to that map and the capital. And it said that there was very little this Incan army could do to release their leader, Atahualpa. So the army was not sent to rescue him. And it would have been inconceivable for any army of the Inca to actually move to engage Francisco Franco in 1532 at Cajamarca. Marching an army down those very narrow roads, even though the roadways were really well built, and top to bottom of the Inca world was 2,000 miles, marching an army of even 1,000 men down those roads would be very awkward and would take some time to do. So the army was not sent out. So here we go. Going back to the point I wanted to make, that in the early stages of the Incan world, they were building really large structures, and for the 1400s, 1450s, when the empire was starting to come into it, so building structures like this. This is very much earlier Incan stonework. And unlike other technologies in history, unlike other civilizations, the Inca seemed to start off with some of the best stonework that this planet has ever seen. And its stonework starts to deteriorate in skill. And when we start to get to the 1530s, we start to realize that something more crucial was happening in the 1530s, a lack of manpower. They didn't have the manpower to build in this way anymore. So things have very, very much changed. Atahualpa, in the custody of Francisco Pizarro's men, is said to have been treated extremely well. Francisco Pizarro said to his government in Cusco, if you send us gold, we will release him. Now, this is an interesting area of this. The interesting area is that to the Inca, gold wasn't very important, even though gold represent the tears of their sun god Inti. It was seen lying around. They had so much of it. They had whole streets that had gold nuggets lying on the floor, and there's at Cusco, the walls there of the temples inside the house were cladded with gold. This is how much gold there was. And the Inca were probably quite insulted by this, because why would they want to give gold to Francisco Pizarro? To them, they had lots of gold. Why didn't they ask for something more important, like slaves or something else? And what simply happened, along the long trails going all the way to Cajamarca from Cusco, they put on their llamas and alpacas panniers, which contained hundreds of pounds of gold and silver. We're talking about thousands of pounds of gold and silver, not thousands of pounds in money, but thousands of pounds in weight. When the gold got to Cajamarca, Francisco Pizarro was so shocked with the amount of gold, he instantly ordered Atahualpa to be executed. Because at that moment, all the rumors of the Inca being extremely wealthy were true. But this doesn't answer why I object to the Spanish being the ones responsible for the fall of the Incan Empire. Again, in the subtext of giving up all this gold means that probably your population has diminished in numbers, and also that the army wasn't sent also tells you another thing, that maybe they really didn't have an army to send in the first place, because most of the soldiers had been killed in the Civil War. Rather interesting map in front of you. I want to go back to the earlier point. Going back to Cajamarca again. You can clearly see this on your map. So let's get the annotation bar up. There you go. There's Cajamarca. And it's likely that Pizarro may have landed at Tumas, headed all the way down the Incan road to Cajamarca. Now, Cusco is found there. Did you know that Cusco is 11,000 feet above sea level? So another point to be made here is that the Spanish troops are going to start to suffer from altitude sickness. Also, they're going to be suffering from a lack of food. Also, the Spanish army is going to be suffering from tropical diseases. Also, the Spanish army is going to be suffering from guerrilla attacks. But still, nevertheless, we're told that 168 men and their 62 horses defeated the Inca and took over the Incan world, which is a load of balderdash, because it's simply not possible. Something else is at play. You know, whenever you look at these lectures, you do them so many times, you actually think there's something wrong with what the history is telling us. What the history tells us at Cajamarca, the Spanish undertook a cavalry charge of the 6,000 soldiers that had followed Atahualpa to meet Francisco Pizarro. 6,000. And they undertook one cavalry charge with 62 horses. And they opened fire on the Inca with their new hand cannons, later on known as the muskets. And they would have had one or two ships' cannons with them as well. Be that these hand cannons would usually take about 3 minutes to reload. After you fired them once, you're at the mercy of the enemy. But still we're told that 160 men and their 62 horses massacred the army of 6,000 that followed Atahualpa to meet Francisco Pizarro. Somebody's not telling us the truth. You know what I've always said? I've always said about the Battle of Watling Street in regards to Queen Boudica, the Queen Boudica rebellion, and all those that called themselves Boudica. The Roman army at Watling Street probably consisted of around 6,000 men, facing not 100,000 warriors that we're told about in history, but probably the same number that there was as Roman soldiers. And the reason why I mention that is I talk about food. You cannot march an army without food. I'm sorry, you can't fight without food. And also 6,000 followers, if they were at Cajamarca, would have needed a supply train. They would have needed to get 6,000 followers there in the first place, and all the food required to feed 6,000 soldiers. The food required to feed 6,000 soldiers is quite phenomenal. And this is why I'm doubting the figures. I believe that Atahualpa probably had a small army of about 200 men. And then you could start to see the practicalities. Take a naught off and a few other figures, and then you get a bit close to it. So the next place we're going to actually go to is known as Cusco. There is our Cusco. Now just think about it. Again, more fantasy. You can disagree with this, all of you. I'm fine with that, okay? But I'm not seeing any evidence to say that the Inca really had the ability to resist Francisco Pizarro after this devastating civil war, after towns and cities destroyed at their own hand, and also the fact that the country was completely riddled in disease. This road network would take, for example, typhus, 70 days to get from the top of the country down to the bottom. Just 70 days. You can imagine within a year, millions of people are going to be dead. At one point, in 1528, the population of the Incan world was around 12 million. By the year 1572, it reduced to only 10% of the original number. So we're only talking about around 2 million people, under 2 million people survived just around 50 years. 2 million people out of a population of 12. That's not going to be at the hands of the Spanish. That's going to be at the hands of a major pandemic. And also, I know some of you are not going to want to hear this, the people who actually built North America were slaves, not from Africa, but actually from the Incan civilization. We've got written reports saying that lots of Incan people were actually enslaved by the Spanish, and they were sent north to work on new colonies and new towns and cities in the northern, later to be the northern states, North America. So it was the Inca who started building lots of those roads in North America and the towns, and it was the Incans whose blood is in the earth of North America first, before those from Africa. And that's a rather important point. We've got to remember that the Incans, 10 million of them were dead after 50 years. 10 million. That's a phenomenal number of people to lose. The next bit of the history is that with the Incan army at Cusco, the capital, after Atahualpa's death, the government at Cusco was a bit confused with what to do. It was paralyzed. It's said that outside Cusco, here we go, there was the 168 Spanish with 62 horses traveling a distance of around 600 miles. They got to the outside of Cusco with a few hundred people that had turned against the Incans, and they fought off an army of 100,000 Incans, and a large number of them being slaughtered. And you start to think somebody is actually telling fibs. And there is no way that Pizarro's army could get from Cajamarca with tens of thousands of pounds of gold, because they would have had to have carried it with them. They would have got all the way to Cusco. Every single one of them lived. Not a single horse died, not a single casualty. And I tell you what, in all the years I've been studying war, that's not a possibility. Some of these Spanish would have died through guerrilla attacks. Some of them would have died through accidents. Some of them would have died through Cajamarca. Some of them would have died through lack of food. Some of them would have died through tropical diseases, and so on and so on. So you start to read that the history that I've got in front of me is wrong. Because in history, what we have is the written record of the conquerors. It's almost as if the Spanish want you to hear that they conquered the Incan world. How wonderful they were to conquer the Incan world. They hadn't conquered anything. All they had done was take over a world that was full of diseases, over a world that had already been destroyed. It's likely that even a few years earlier, the Incan world probably had about 20 years left in it. And why do I say that? Well, if anyone's actually studied the Aztec civilization, they will know the following. They will know that the Aztec civilization in 1521, and thanks for mentioning that, Bill, when Montezuma met with Cortez on the eastern seaboard of Central America, it said that Montezuma's kingdom was on the edge of collapse. Montezuma was having to deal with internal rebellions. Montezuma was having to deal with famine. Montezuma was having to deal with climatic collapses in temperature. Montezuma was dealing with a population that was just about to collapse. So when the Spanish came over, they entered an empire that was on the edge of collapse. All they needed to do was push it over the edge. And then you see millions of Aztecs dying, not just through warfare, but due to those terrible diseases that the conquistadors are introducing. Keep this map in your mind because it's going to be very, very useful for the rest of the lecture. So in the middle, you've got Cusco, Cajamarca, and near Cusco is another very, very important site, which we'll go into in a nice bit of detail in a short while. But this location is rather interesting. This is known as Ollantaytambo. Ollantaytambo, don't say it fast, was the place that the Inca, wait for it, defeated the Spanish in battle in 1537. It's also near Vilcabamba, which was to be the Neo-Inca capital city for another 50 years, another 40 odd 50 years. So looking at this, we see Machu Picchu, and north of Machu Picchu, we've got the Andes. The land is divided into a coastal strip, and then you've got sort of a plateau type strip, and then you've got a mountainous strip with dense jungles, with empty landscapes with no water, i.e. Nazca on the map there. And you're looking at a landscape that will not welcome any foreigners that don't know the landscape. If the Spanish did so well, if you want to believe the Spanish doing so well, why is it that half of the expeditions to find Petiti, which is the lost city of gold, El Dorado, why is it that half of those expeditions never ever came back? Why is it they got completely lost in those jungles and all the members of the expedition died? Why is that? Even if they're better equipped in the 1800s. Fawcett's expedition in the 1920s, 1930s. You all know about the Fawcett's expedition, the Lost City of Zed with Brad Pitt in that film. You all know about that one. That's based on a true story. He never returned as well. So what's going on? Why is the history so wrong about this civilization? It's so wrong. When the conquistadors got to Cusco, it's likely that Cusco was more or less abandoned. The population had been a lot less than what it had been years before. There was no defenses for Cuzco. And then we find one of the greatest tragedies of South American history. And can I, there's one point that I've completely missed, so keep that thing there. If you look at the map, it says here that it says about Incan territory. So when the Inca are building those great big stone structures that we've seen from the other images, they're from about the 1230s to about the 1400s. And the interesting thing, for the first, let's see, 200 years of the Incan Empire, it's quite small. It's in fact very small indeed. So there we go. Let's put this little border around it. Bring in there, come in there, and sort of go back there. It's quite a small empire indeed. But it's got the resources, manpower, and wealth to build those wonderful stone structures that we've already seen. However, if you look at the table, between 1463 and 1493, the empire expands to 2,000 miles from one end to the next. And what do we know about history, Dree? Now, what we know about history is that when an empire expands rapidly, it will fall rapidly. This is rather different than the Seneca collapse. When you rise quickly, like a pyramid, what have you got to do to the other side of the pyramid? You've got to go down from the apex. This was what we see in regards to the Incan Empire. The British Empire, that's a good thing, right? The British Empire. The British Empire grew from about 1750. Remember, it loses the United States, but it's got Canada. Moving to about 1800, it's really starting to conquer India. It then, 1878, conquers Africa. Well, not all of Africa, you know, it conquers its bits in Africa. From Cape Town to Alexandria, you've got a huge red strip. And then, 1878, the scramble for Africa. Other than the slaughter of the Zulus, we don't actually see much of an expansion in the British Empire. The British Empire, in 128 years, expanded to where it was. Within 80 years, the British Empire had collapsed. Exactly the same thing happened to the Inca. The British Empire collapsed at the hands of the British Empire. The British Empire entered a pointless war in the First World War. That was the start of our decline of our empire. We also entered the Second World War. Let's not go there. But the fact of the matter is, when empires grow rapidly, they fall rapidly. Now, what we're saying is that this empire did not collapse at the hands of the conquistadors. It's the Inca who were responsible. I've always argued that if the Inca had remained a small empire, right? One, it may never have been found by the Spanish for many years. And secondly, if they had hung on for about another 20 years, they may have come across the Japanese who were trading up and down this coastline. And the Japanese would have brought in gunpowder and they would have brought in guns. And you know what? If they had faced Pizarro 20 years later, the Inca would have had an army that could have matched a Western army, which would have changed the whole history of South and North America. Can you imagine that? The Inca suddenly growing with weapons up against the Spanish, defeating the Spanish. What would have happened to North America? And also, there wouldn't have been the Inca slaves to build North America. So North America could have taken a whole different history than we see today. So what I'd like to do is go to an absolutely fascinating site. And hopefully, if we can move, right, okay, we can move. Now, what we're going to go to in a moment is a site that is known as KARL-JAMES. Okay, it's quite an exciting site, KARL-JAMES. Now, when you look at a soldier like this is a Spanish soldier from around 1560, not 1530. The difference is with this Spanish soldier going up against the Inca is that this weapon would have had a tripod. And you needed a tripod to fire one of these arquebuses, which were in fact invented in Germany. Now, I'd love Bill's mic to be on at this minute to have a discussion, but I'm just going to mention that even at Islandawana, the British Army, even though you've got first rank fire, second rank fire, you know the drill, they kept firing until Henry Martini rifles become overheated, or we're told. However, they were able to fire a number of rounds a minute. These guys were only able to fire a round every 3 minutes. And whilst they're loading and priming their musket, they are vulnerable and they've got to put a stand up. So this makes them very impractical weapons in warfare. And it would be quite easy for a group of these Spaniards to be overcome by the Inca. So why do historians insist that the Inca had large armies when it actually makes no practical sense? When you actually look at these notes, nobody actually questions it. You know, if you go onto something like Wikipedia, it's almost going to be slightly similar to what I'm saying. And nobody seems to question these things. But whenever you go into history, as Jessica knows full well, you've always got to question history, because history is not always right. It's the archaeology that is usually right, in what we saw last week. This is another musketeer from probably around the 1560s as well, and with the stand there. Now, before we get to KARL-JAMES, I would like to talk about 9 key facts in regards to the Incan civilization. So, one key fact. This, by the way, is the Roman Emperor, the Incan Emperor Atahualpa, as portrayed in 1532 by a Spanish artist. The Incan world, in a sense, if you look at the map today, covered most of present-day Peru, big chunks of Ecuador, most of Chile, bits of Bolivia, and Colombia. Within 20 years, the empire was in ruins. And one fact is that the Spanish did become the undisputable owners of the old Incan world, but they didn't conquer it in the way that historians tell us. They didn't conquer it conquered by the Spanish Empire. It had been weakened. It had destroyed itself. And all the Spanish were doing was just taking over a world and enslaving its people from the terrible diseases that the land was subject to. You could ironically say that, for example, that the Spanish may have deliberately introduced these diseases. Who knows? Fact 2. Atahualpa being warned about Pizarro simply means that there must have been a great deal of intelligence out there. This was not, as some historians tell us, a complete chance invasion. You don't go off with a load of horses and men armed up to the teeth without knowing what's in front of you. Fact 3. The Incan Empire had been collecting gold and silver for centuries, and the Spanish soon found most of it. Now, you know, I've mentioned about this great ransom that was paid to release Atahualpa. So here we go. 160 odd men that first arrived in Peru, with Pizarro became very wealthy beyond their wildest imaginations. When the loot for the ransom was divided, even the lowest in a complicated pay scale of infantry received, wait for it, Drina, 45 pounds of gold and 90 pounds of silver, not in money, but in weight of gold and silver. Actually, Drina, if somebody had given you 45 pounds of gold in money back then, you would have been extremely wealthy.
Yes.
If somebody had given you 45 pounds in gold in weight, that's something else.
Yeah.
Now, Drina, I don't know if you're going to be able to spot the mistake with, I don't know if you're going to be able to spot what's wrong with this whole fact, but I'll ask you in a minute. The gold alone is worth in today's money over £500,000, probably more than that. And back then, 45 pounds of gold would have gone even further. You could have bought several villages and a lordship. You know, we're talking about we're talking about an astronomical amount of money, even for the lowliest of soldiers. And then when they got to Cuzco, it said that double the amount again of gold was paid to the lowliest of the infantry. What the officers received was probably 10 times the amount in gold. So you're talking about £450 in gold for an officer. By the time they got to Cuzco, that amount was doubled again. And my question I ask, Drina, how the hell would a single soldier be able to transport that amount of money and that amount of gold? How would you be able to do it?
I don't know. I was wondering that. It seems rather a heavy load to bear. I don't know.
You know, somebody spotted that today. You know, this is the 5th time I've done this lecture today, and every time you do it, somebody spots something new. And that was spotted this morning. And they said, hang on a minute, Carl. I think the person said, Carl, that's absolute nonsense. And I said, thank you, because that's what I want to hear. Because I don't agree with this either. I didn't understand why I disagreed with it. You know, when you're reading something that's obvious and you can't see it, I didn't really know. And then I thought, actually, you know, Jane, you're actually right. And then you start to think, hang on a minute. Why would you give your infantrymen this amount of gold in the first place? Surely giving them a purse of gold would have been enough for them. Anyway, we won't go any further with that because that takes us on another journey. Fact 4. This is Pizarro. The soldiers and people of the Incan Empire did not meekly turn over their homeland to the hated invaders. Major Inca generals fought pitched battles against the Spaniards. And that one wonderful battle that we're going to look at, the great victory in 1537, that basically defeated the Spanish. It sent the Spanish away. It's likely that the Inca suffered so many casualties that they had to defeat themselves. But it's also false to say that the Inca just rolled over. Okay? Now, some of you might be thinking, hang on a minute, Carl, I'm really confused. You might be thinking, 1 minute, Carl, you're saying that the Incan Empire wasn't destroyed at the hands of the Spanish, and then the next minute you're saying that there were battles and the Spanish were fighting the Inca. But what I'm saying, in effect, is that the factors for the collapse of the Incan Empire were down to many factors, and one of the biggest factors was disease. One of the biggest factors was manpower. If you don't have manpower and you're losing soldiers and you're unable to fight the enemy, that's going to lead you to retreat. You know, there's all those other things. lack of food as well. So, right, fact 6. The Pizarro brothers. You can't make this up, Drina. The Pizarro brothers ruled like a mafia. The unquestionable leader of the conquest of the Inca was Francisco Pizarro. He was termed later on, and not in the date, Drina, and you'll know why, as an illegitimate, illiterate Spaniard who was nothing, who had no other skills than looking after the family's herd of pigs. But Pizarro, being uneducated but very clever, was able to exploit the weaknesses of the Inca. Now, I've always referred to this as he was one of 4 brothers. But in my reading, it looked like he had 4 brothers, he was one of 5. One of them was called Hernando, one was called Gonzalo, the other one was called Francisco Martin, and the other was called Juan, of all names. And it's said that they fought amongst themselves. They divided up the Incan world amongst themselves. And in doing so, they were involved in civil wars amongst themselves. So this wasn't fighting against the Inca, this was infighting. Now, fact 7. Now I'm going to read this out, even though I disagree with it. So here we go. The Inca had skilled generals, agreed. Veteran soldiers, agreed. And massive armies numbering in the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, disagree. The Spanish were greatly outnumbered, not sure. But their horses, armor, and weapons gave them advantage that proved too great for their enemies to overcome. I do not agree with that. There were no horses in South America until Europeans brought them, agreed. But nor did the Inca need horses. They had alpacas and llamas. Native warriors may have been terrified of the horses at first, but naturally there was only just under 70 of them, 68. They would have eventually. All you need to do with these horses is to get them to follow you down one of the Inca roads, which were quite narrow. All you need is with a bit of a cliff fall, and you've got the Spanish army trapped. You know, these Incas weren't stupid. They would have known all these strategies. And it's likely they didn't use any of these strategies because there was very few Inca to actually undertake the wholesale slaughter of the Spanish. It's sometimes said that the armor itself would have meant the Spanish were impregnable. But the Spanish are not impregnable to tropical diseases and bites from horrible beasties. And the armor wouldn't have protected you from somebody who was able to throw a spear at you into, because it would have been armor, it would have been metal armor, it would have been leather. All you need to get is a bit of a spear into that leather or something. The Spaniard is going to get an infection and secondary infection and is going to die. So, if you get a cut or something within this landscape, it's going to kill you. So all of these factors are not put into this. And factor 8, which is something I've already sort of covered already, is that at one point, the only people ruling over the old land of the Inca was in fact the Spanish themselves with all the civil wars. And you start to think it's really difficult to work out what's going on, to be honest with you. And then we got fact 9. It led to the El Dorado myth that we'll actually cover towards the end. So what we're going to do, we're going to look for a capture. I'm going to need to take a break in a moment. So what are we talking about? We've got Quinto, Jahan, we've got Nazca, we've got Cusco, we've got Machu Picchu. None of this seemingly comes into our understanding of what's going on. And the wonderful Lake Titicaca, and if anyone knows anything about the Lake Titicaca, that sort of covers the lake people of Titicaca, who live on reeds on the lake, and they've got these reed platforms, and every few years they replace the reeds, and then that sort of drops down, and floating reed beds on Lake Titicaca. People actually still live in there today. So most of what we will say and have already said is involving more or less the north of the country, Cusco, Coricancha. We're looking at we're looking at Cajamarca, and so on and so on. So these roads themselves, this network was well maintained. It was a really good road network. but it wasn't that wide. And the other thing, another fact to chuck in here is that the Inca did not have carts with wheels. They used sledges. Even though the Inca was aware of the wheel, they didn't need them on their very narrow roadways, because some of the roadways may have been 1 or 2 feet wide along a rocky canyon. You can't take a wagon along that, so the wagons would have been absolutely useless. Coricancha is where we're going to go next, at Cusco. You can see Machu Picchu is sort of northwest of Cusco. And there we go, Coricancha. Believe it or not, Drina, that is an Incan building, the one on the left. The Incan building was so perfect that they actually built a monastery, a cathedral, a Catholic monastery, Catholic cathedral, directly on top of this site. I need to take a break now. So what I'm going to do, Drina, is, are there any questions? No?
It seems to me that you can't quite believe what anybody writes about battles, because it's the winner that writes the words, and they're going to want to make themselves look better than they are.
Do you know, you go on, carry on.
No, I was going to say, they'd say the opposing army is far too much bigger than they are, just so they'll look better.
Yeah, every single time. I'll just tell you this now, right? There, in 1405, the Welsh with the French invaded England, Gloucester, and they got all the way to a place known as Woodbury. The historians tell us that the English army of about 10,000 and the Welsh army of about 10,000 looked at each other for 9 days. They decided that the English go back to London and the French and the Welsh go back to Wales, right? That's how we're told, that's what we're told happened, right? The armies were too big to fight each other. And you're thinking, hang on a minute, right? The maximum field army that the Welsh could put into the field in about 1405 on the side of Owen Glyndŵr would have been about 1,000, maybe 1,000 Frenchmen. Then that means that there were 2,000 Welsh and French at the Battle of Woodbury, probably 2,000 for King Henry IV. And you actually start to realize that, in fact, even a description like that is wrong. It's almost as if they overemphasize those involved in battles, for example. Do you know what? I'm tempted to say that Napoleon's invading army into Russia was not as big as people say. What we usually say when Napoleon's invading army into Russia was, some say it was 450,000. Other accounts say it was like 680,000. I would like to go for around 450,000, because we can't account for many people in that campaign. So if you put the figure down, you start to understand it a bit better. But we do know one thing: the figures involved in the Somme and Messines Ridge. At the Somme, 3 million involved on the Allied side, 1.5 million involved in the German side. Those figures are accurate, because we're talking about modern history. You know, it was starting to get very difficult to make things up. But when we're talking about moments in time like this, it's quite easy to not work out the truth from the fiction. So what we're going to do, we're going to put everybody's mics on. And so here we go. So we have been joined by the wonderful Pat. I want to keep this to one sentence or one comment each, or one question each, please, because I would like a drink and a little break. So Henry, what would you like to say if you can want to disagree with me, because nobody has all week?
No, I don't disagree. I think the Spanish side would be writing a PR exercise to gee up more Spaniards to follow them out.
Actually, that comes up in the text a little bit later on in a different form. It comes up in the form of Right, here we go. It comes up in the form of the El Dorado myth. It's saying that by the time you start looking about El Dorado, all the gold has been moved out of the Incan territory, or most of it. In doing so, settlers come over from Europe thinking that they're going to find gold, and they never do. So in what you've just said, Henry, you are very right. Right,
Thank you,
Anne, would you... Thank you, for Henry. Anything else you want to say quick now?
No.
Anne, what would you like to say?
No, I haven't got any questions, thank you.
My God, that makes a change. Christ almighty. Oh my God, Bill, you know what? I need to fall on the floor. Bill, anything from you? Come on, disagree with me on something, please.
If all this gold and silver was floating around, the only way it could be transported along these very narrow tracks and pathways would be by pack horses. And that's obviously what they did. But if there was all that gold and silver around...
Bill, they only had 68 horses. There's not enough to carry all that amount of gold. Go on. Go on, Bill. Oh, Bill's frozen.
Oh, dear.
Oh, dear, Bill. Go on, Bill. Shout again.
Now, the actual source of all this wealth in the present day.
Bill, right, go on. Start again.
I was talking about gold. All this gold and silver obviously came from the local mines in the Cusco area around there. I was just wondering whether all these mines are still workable or not, and what the current wealth is of the country, the modern day country, or have they all been mined out? Because obviously it's a very rich strata and very rich geology out there.
Now, this is a double-edged sword, right? Somebody asked me, I think it was Monday, they said, well, Carl, do you really believe that all the gold came from this part of South America? And I didn't answer that. And then I thought, well, if these gold mines were so full of gold, why is it the conquistadors didn't mine them? Why is it suddenly after a while there was no more gold? That's what you're asking. It's the same question. And I think that it could be very much that lots of this is actually on the surface. Lots of this is in dried out riverbeds, very similar to the gold that we used to find in Britain. It was in the riverbeds until we started that extensive mining at Dolakothai. And again, this is an area of the geology was probably already exhausted out by the Inca. By the time the conquistadors got there, they took what they could, and there was nothing much left to mine. But they are doing some mining, but it's not on the degree of anything before, Bill.
Yeah. One further question, and you know in which direction I'm going now. In the image behind you, we've got all these finely worked limestone blocks, which have been carved exactly, you know. So you know what my next question is? A question which never crops up in any TV program. How the hell did they actually make these wonderful structures?
Well, we can understand. We can understand how they moved all this and with the technology and so on, but how did they actually carve the stone? And
exactly. Is that limestone behind you?
No, Bill. It's mainly basaltic rock.
Well, that's even harder, isn't it? It's so hard. How the hell did they actually carve the stones out? Unless they had iron chisels. Maybe they did. I guess they did.
Or maybe, Bill, they didn't have iron at all. They had titanium chisels.
Now, Carl.
Hang on. You've got to be fair now. Come on.
Be sensible.
What about you, Pat?
Did they have meteorite?
Hello, it's Pat.
Meteorite iron.
Yeah.
Well, we know that the Aztec had meteorite iron, but unfortunately, there's not a lot of meteorite iron out there. And even if there's bogs and any bogo or anything like that, that's really soft. So that is a question that we can't really answer. So, and finally, Jessica, anything you would like to say? No, okay. Jessica is there somewhere. We're going to take a break for just over 10 minutes, and we will be back.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, go on, Jessica, give it to us, babe.
Sorry about that. I didn't know I was on mute. I agree with what you say. I do think maybe illnesses have got a big thing to do with it. When I studied the last pandemic last year, the 1918 one, it was very easy to see it being sort of spreaded by obviously war. And I do agree that there's probably a lot of factors, but I'm not sure. I'm feeling a bit suspicious about the Spanish. I'm not sure whether they've exaggerated things to justify what they done, and then exaggerated how many Incas there were.
Yes.
Just to make themselves seem bigger to other maybe other communities.
Yes. There's a point that I missed earlier on. You just right now. Now we know that the Civil War would have wiped out, probably a few million people before the Spanish got there, and then we got a few more million who were dying due to diseases, and then we got the vulnerable people being enslaved, and then we got a couple of million Incas actually surviving. Where we get the figures from population from the Incan civilization, it is based on a very simple equation. Before 4 years before the Spanish got there, at the height of the civil war between the two Incan princes, at the death of their father, there were okay. If we look at it this way, quite simple mathematics. There were 10,000 settlements up and down the Incan landscape, right? Which showed life. People were living there, towns, villages, and all the rest of it. By the year 1572, we see that 9,000 of those settlements are completely abandoned with no life in them at all in the archaeology. So that leaves 1,000 settlements, giving you a population figure at a height of 12 million to just under 2 million. So there you go.
Okay, that's all right then.
So, okay, we're going to take a break, and Henry, can I have my dress back next week? Can I just remind you all that we're going to be doing this thing online tomorrow, that you get all the link. It's a, you could just join it and hear what I've got to say. That's live on YouTube. The walk on September the 13th, the Sunday in Lantwick Major. And obviously next week we'll be looking at the collapse of the civilization of Byzantium. I'm taking a break. I will be back soon.
Oh, Pat.
Yes, hello.
Hi, Pat. Didn't Dorothy want to come?
Well, she hasn't been out or gone anywhere. Her food comes to her, her children come to her, and so she was really frightened about coming to me, even though I pick her up and all, having to sit close together.
Well, she said she said she was a bit worried about going in a car because she hasn't been in a car. And
we're just sitting too close together by the laptop, to see.
Yeah. So
I went over there at 1:15 and stayed till 2:15, and we sat. I sat near the window, and she sat 2 meters away on the set.
Yeah.
And I got to see her dog and talk
Did
to
you?
her.
You saw the dog?
Yes.
Oh.
Teddy's gorgeous. Just gorgeous.
Oh, good.
So she was doing okay. Yesterday she had a headache and the heat was killing her, and she didn't well at all last night. But I talked to her into letting me come see her for just a little while. I was trying to get there, but I was babysitting, so I couldn't leave here till after 1, and got there as fast as I could. And then coming home, I thought, I'll pick up my prescription because it was on the way, down. So I picked up my prescription. That's when Carl phoned up at 37 minutes past and asked where he was.
Oh, right.
Had to get home.
I thought you would have stayed a bit because, well, it's a long way over. It's hot, isn't it?
Yes. I have an air-conditioned car, so I turned it.
Right.
It was 31 degrees when I got in the car. By the time I got to Dorothy, the outside temperature said 33 degrees. I was unbelievable. I took my umbrella with me and carried my own shade with me as I walked around the side of the house. I was going to sit outside.
Oh, well, I'm I'm surprised she didn't tell you, really, but I suppose she was hanging on to see how she felt.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, she told me yesterday that she didn't think she'd be well enough. She called me back because I asked her. She said okay, and then last night she called me and said no, headache, not feeling well.
Yeah,
and
she's not very good in the sun. Yeah. I'm going to make myself a coffee now, quickly.
Bye then.
Okay, bye.
She called it foundation. Anything like is love. Okay, we might be able to put another application as well. This is just traffic. You know what I might do? I might use that for travel expenses. Thing is, I know I'm not doing books, right? Now I've done it, Gina. I've made myself a coffee.
Oh, well done.
actually, for medical reasons, I'm not allowed to drink coffee.
So we'll have some fun.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you will. They've all gone and left us, Trina.
The swines.
I know, I tell you what, they got no respect in South Wales for anything.
No, absolutely. But you know, one of the emails I got, I'm not complaining, I'm questioning. It seemed to indicate that you were getting abuse for your work or something. People were saying unpleasant things. Is that right?
Well, yeah, we had, well, last week I had, well, last week I had one person complaining that they felt that even though they go to the Zoom classes, that they have a right to have the notes. And I was saying, actually, the notes were prepared for people that don't come to the classes. And this person was saying, oh, well, that's not fair. Why should they get printed notes and I don't? Well, I'm thinking, hang on a minute. You don't actually have a class. So these people get, in other words, when I spend time doing these notes, like last night, I was, you know, I did some more last night, and it takes me about 4 hours, and then we got to post them and stuff. So when you think about it, the 10 people who get the printed notes, it's like a miniature class for them. So I'm actually spending time doing those notes for them, getting all together and all the rest of it. Anyway, this other person didn't understand that. He said, oh, well, if I don't get the notes via email anymore, I'm not going to do the Zoom classes anymore. And I just thought, well, I don't get it. I really don't get people. I absolutely don't get people. And then there was somebody, oh God, and it was just, and lots of things to do with technology and all the rest of it. And it's almost as if we're to blame, and we're not. And it's just all these different things. And all we're trying, the thing is, when you look at it, right, £48 works out £5.50 a week, and what people are getting for that £5.50 a week, we have estimated that we should be charging £50 per person a week for what we provide. Because that's what we should be charging each week, £50 for the service we provide, but we're charging £5.50. So for what we're charging £5.50, we shouldn't be getting any hassle at all.
No, of course not. No. How horrid. That's really mean.
So I felt like telling them, well, you know the door, you can go through it.
Yeah, quite. Strange
for example, Drina, we're going to get some more money to pay for somebody their fuel to travel from one part of the Vale of Glamorgan to another part of the Vale of Glamorgan with a portable library for about 5 people. So we're getting some expenses for that. We've also got some money to do coastal erosion surveying. Now, when that comes through to people, right, that's being paid for by the taxpayer, and we're thinking, well, how can people moan about that? We're actually doing that out of our own bat. And it's and the other thing as well is what we find is when things are free, people people have got a habit of complaining more. We've had we've had circumstances in one or two of the Zoom classes recently, not this one, where we've said to people, you know, come along and, you know, see what it's like, and then they moan, and you're thinking, you're not even paying for this.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it's my time and Michelle's time and Rosamond's time and Andrea's time and everybody else's time, and even people who do articles for the newsletter, right? So we've got the next newsletter coming out. They're doing it voluntarily. And if people turn around and moan about the newsletter, they know where to go, because as far as we're concerned, for £28, they get these colour newsletters. We should be charging a lot more. And we're not.
Yeah, you should. You should.
So the other thing as well is when, you know, with, for example, going back and having meetings in halls is financially impossible, because you know, we've with one of our meeting places in Lantworth Major, for us to have meetings in a hall with social distancing, with the numbers of people we've got, instead of charging people £48 for 2 months, we've got to charge them about £88 for 2 months. So in other words, we're not going to be teaching in those halls because of the cost involved.
Yes.
Anyway, we'll get started in a minute. My wonderful Michelle has turned up. Don't tell her. Don't say to her that I've been calling her a witch. Oh, that pain there. So we're going to get back to it now. Right, folks, we're going to get back to it now, and I got to get into a rhythm. Oh, and as we're just about to start, Anne's gone off, hasn't she? So.
Well, Carl, I'm going to try to sign into my laptop so you can see my face. Okay.
All right.
Okay, here goes. I lost it. I couldn't find it.
Oh, come on, hurry up. We haven't got all day. Bill's waiting. Bill looks like something out of an E.T. movie with his head. It's all sort of elongated and with the light behind him. Right. Ouch. No, it's a finger, Bill. There.
You can hear me, can you?
Yeah.
Good, excellent. It's bleeding hot out here in my bedroom.
I tell you what, it's really hot here.
It ain't hot. It ain't hot off, man.
Hi, Carl.
What's that?
Are you outside?
No, I'm indoors and it's really hot.
Oh, right. I'm just checking why the sound was funny. It's
me. I'll leave this part in. There. Now I'll just open in this other one. If Carl will let me in.
Carl.
I can hear you.
He's gone.
Oh, okay.
He's gone off somewhere. He'll be back in a minute.
Okay.
Oh, I can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you too. Yeah, I'm on my laptop.
Right, what have I got to do now? Oh, right, you sorted it out.
Yeah, invite me in.
Right, okay then, right. Let's get straight down to the undies.
Invite me in. It's Pat.
You are in.
No, you got to invite me again because I'm only in on one. I just closed my PC and I'm trying to get into my laptop.
But it's not on you. I'm looking at my screen.
Isn't there? I closed the one Pat-gammon and opened the other Pat-gammon.
You've closed the wrong Pat-gammon.
Oh. I can hear your voice on my laptop.
Pat-gammon.
No, you right. Okay, what you did, Pat, right?
Yeah.
I tell you what, I'm dealing with a load of numpties here. Right, basically, you put on your technology, and you had your existing technology. So the technology, instead of using your existing technology, is the one that you turned off, and you're back with the existing technology that you had at the beginning.
Oh, well, I can't see anything. It looks like I closed that one. Do you want me to go back and come in again?
I wish you'd go to the same place Anne's at.
Has she come back with her tea? Oh, she's back, huh? Okay, I'll start again. I'll close everything off. I'm closing
right, okay, whilst everybody's waiting, flipping heck, I gotta go somewhere today. Like,
oh,
to
okay,
bed.
well, you start talking.
Right,
I'll come in.
Did any, Pat, whilst you're there, did anyone order any of these string bags, right?
String bag?
These?
What? I can't see it.
Did you order any of these string bags, Pat?
I never even heard of a string bag.
Basically, it's a bag with a string on it and you tighten it.
Michael had one.
I'd like to see it.
Well, anyway, we ordered a load of them, and I can't work out who wants them. Right. Okay, so that's that, and I'm going to what else am I going to say? That's that. Right, we're all ready. Right, Pat, are we ready to start?
No, I want a picture. I got to get a picture. I haven't got a picture. Sorry. I'm going to try to sign into my other one where it says archaeology. No, that's class. Archaeology. Oh God. Yesterday. When did you send this thing to join? Oh, Angela. Class note images. Oh God. I'm not in. All I got is your voice. Why can I get? Oh wait, here's a little thing at the bottom. Let me hit that. Oh, I think I found you. I see you. I see you. Okay. You're on my laptop, and I'll do my video. Here I am. I'm starting my video, and there, I'm here.
You know, thanks for the comment.
Wow.
Oh, and Carl, don't get too close to the microphone. That's when your voice breaks up.
The microphone's here.
I know, but it's there. Oh, okay. Sorry.
Am I sounding clear to everyone?
No.
I'm gonna put my earphones on so I can hear you better.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm gonna do this. Am I sounding clear?
Yes, that's better.
Yeah.
Go.
Right. Okay. We ready to start? Right. Thank goodness.
Yeah. I mean, what you've got to do is you've got to make sure your video and your sound is on, but then you've also got to check that your computer is loud enough.
Henry, can I ask you a question? Did you ever used to have these problems when you were actually presenting to anybody, you know?
Who?
Well, I'm moving on. Right, so I tell you what, I'm going to cut everybody's mics and we're going to get onto KARL-JAMES, okay?
Okay, great.
That's where we're going to be. So, okay, let's get onto the screen. So, KARL-JAMES and bingo. Hang on, no, sharing the wrong one. Oh, yes, that's the one I want. Okay, now you should actually be seeing an article on the screen that says become a member. Is that correct?
Nope.
Not yet.
No. It's loading. Now
There
I have.
it is. Become a member.
Yeah.
Right, you got that? Good.
Yep, KARL-JAMES.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank God for that. Right, now I gotta cut everybody's mics. I tell you what, Jessica, you can keep me company. It's about time you did.
Okay.
Don't get too excited. I've been in dark caves with Bill before.
I remember.
Subject.
Hang on a minute. Hang on. I'm just gonna right. Okay, I'm gonna cut everybody's mics and then I'm gonna mute all. That's it. There you go. And mute. Right, Jessica, you'll probably have to unmute your end. Right,
Yeah, done.
Are you with me?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Good. Okay. Let's screen share again, and there we go. KARL-JAMES. Right. So I'm feeling extremely hot and flustered because of it's too hot. So KARL-JAMES, this is the article that I'm actually looking at now. So I think the best thing to do is to probably scroll through these a minute and just do the article. So the religious complex at Coricancha in the Incan capital at Cuzco contained the Temple of the Sun, which was not only the most sacred site or in the Incan religion, but was considered the very center of the Incan world, or the world to the Inca altogether. This was the center of their place in humanity. The site was also known as the Golden Enclosure and was dedicated to the highest gods in the Inca pantheon, the highest gods associated with the moon, the highest god, Inti, the god of the sun. Little remains today except for some sections of its fine stone walls, which hint at the site's once massive size and the legendary stories which tell of the enormous quantity and quality of gold used to decorate the temples and its golden garden. So what I'd like to do is if we go down and scroll through this article and get this wonderful image, which is that's one of the walls that we're talking about. These are the actual Incan walls, probably built sometime in about the 1450s. You notice that these are really nice ashlar basalt stones, which are not as big as the earlier building, but this is the fine precision of Incan craftsmanship. So this with a wonderful backdrop, the layout and architecture, this is the heart of a huge precinct of temples associated with the highest of gods, the god of the sun. So let's have a little look at what the god of the sun was portrayed as. There's a mask associated with the sun god Inti. And this is rather important when I'm reading this out. So this is all we've got. So if we think of, let's get my annotation up there. And if we think of this being Inti, and Inti represents, is represented in the main temple at Coricancha, this temple at Coricancha with these beautiful stone-built walls. Coricancha is now being absorbed by Cusco, but at that point, there was Cusco and there was Coricancha as the religious site and Cusco, the secular site. But obviously today it's all being absorbed into one city landscape. So this god Inti, the site itself, which is now got the monastery and cathedral of Cusco built directly on top of it and out of the remains of the original Inca complex. This is the center of the complex. And what you see is the rays of the sun shining out in all directions. These rays of the sun shining out in all directions represent cosmic paths or cosmic roads, the physical roads associated with Inti. There were 41 cosmic paths. Now, if you're thinking of this was placed onto a wall or adornment, it's quite likely that the cosmic paths would have been radiating all the way around the circumference of this representation. But anyway, carrying on, 41 cosmic rays. These 41 cosmic rays going out from Coricancha, these pathways were lined with gold. These were pathways lined with gold. So golden nuggets on the pathway, 41 routes leading to 328 sacred sites. It's likely that these 328 sacred sites were also equally all adorned with gold. And the reason why they're equally all adorned with gold, not because the gold was valuable to the Inca, but the gold itself represented the tears and the sweat of Inti, the sun god, him or herself. So there's a sense of geometry and symmetry associated with Coricancha. We don't really know, with what's left today, how Coricancha was directly laid out. But think of this as the temple back in 1450, and now you've got the Catholic cathedral and monastery directly built on top of it. With the fine masonry, you see that Coricancha is within the sense of the Inca. That building at Coricancha was what the Inca world was about. Those thousands of miles of roadway, beautifully built temples. Also, I don't know if I've mentioned this, but what they're doing at Cusco is they're reinstating the original Inca aqueducts leading into the city from the mountains to bring water into the city. So that's great. The Inca aqueducts are still being used. And also the sewage systems and all these other things are slowly starting to be brought into use. So the Inca built more than just temples and used their gold. So these fine masonry skills, the massive walls of the complex, fitting all tightly, when I say loosely together, these buildings are constructed without mortar. When we use the word loosely, when there's seismic activities, as I said, the walls would move and it would go all over the place. So the large curved wall that we've already seen was particularly noted for its form and elegance and its regular masonry. So just go down to that wall again. Let's just sort of hack into that. Oh, hang on, we've gone a bit too far. So there's our wall again. And it just, I tell you what, this just looks unreal. It looks as if it's made last week. It really does. It looks like it's one of those official buildings in Cardiff or London, you know, what the way they build these days with blocks. It looks a bit like that. But this is Incan technology from 1450. And when you get into the precinct, when you get within these walls, into the Temple of the Sun, what you then start to see, and what we're going to do now, we're gonna stop the screen share in a minute to get my other images up here, and we're gonna go on to this one. Okay, and hopefully as we go with that, Jessica, we should start to be sharing one of the individual temples within the central precinct of the Temple of the Sun. So what you're talking about a main garden with temple structures around the outside, the main garden, the main courtyard, and then you have the 41 pathways leading to other temples away from the main holy site of Coricancha. Now, these windows are trapezoidal in shape, and the doorways are trapezoidal in shape, and they batter inwards. And what we mean by trapezoidal is that let's get my little annotations up here, if it will let me. Okay, there you go. Right, here we go. My annotation bar. Let's get that up there. Those that will have been doing my Zoom classes for a while will know that I love my little drawing now. So these are trapezoidal. Can you see it's wider at the bottom than it is at the top? It's battered inwards. You can see the battering, Jessica, and you can also see these little knobs on there. Occasionally these little weird knobs on there. With that image at the beginning of the lecture, there was this stonework with little knobs on them. Typical Incan, it's really weird. And when it comes to Bill's question, how did stonemasons work this stone? Well, that's not today's lecture. But these are actually trapezoidal shaped doorways leading within. And the thing is, if we go with my description, let's get yellow up here. Right, so what would happen is that these trapezoidal doorways and windows allowed access and light to enter the interior space. Okay, bit of an angle. And then this light would hit the walls to the rear of this sub-temple within the temple complex. So if we go to here and we look inside, let's see what, and by the way, the outside of this temple would have had golden sheets on the outside. So
is this a reconstruction?
No, no, it's not. No, these are actually the real buildings. I thought when your voice came through then, Anne, which should have been Jessica's, I thought, yeah, I was a bit confused. So anyway, what's happening? Anne, don't do that again. Right, so what we're talking about is that the light's shining in, and it's hitting the backs of these walls. Now, the walls themselves, these are actually covered in golden sheets. And usually what's happening is what we might find is some precious stones, emeralds, studying the outside of these walls, and lots of precious stones, lots of basaltic stones as well. And these would be beautifully decorated, you know, they would be hammered in. It was beautiful. And the interior buildings, a very strange thing about this, which I've been struggling to work out. Why would this high technology have roofs that were thatched? Now, I haven't been able to have a debate about that, Jessica, but it's an odd one. The doors were also covered, the wooden doors were also covered in golden sheets, as were the interior and exterior of the various temples. And listen to these facts, Jessica, listen to these, right? Remember, the Temple of the Sun precincts, you've got a central courtyard, the garden as they referred to it as, with these little temples all the way around the outside, probably shaped into a square. It's said that these walls of the temples were cladded in 700 half square meter sheets. 700 half square meter sheets. Each of these sheets weighed 2 kilograms, meaning that the gold on these walls alone contributed to 1,400 kilograms of gold alone with these walls. Not what's on the floor, not what's on the ceiling. This is what we're talking about. Beaten metal sheets with the representations of Inti and all sorts of other things. Actually, representations of jaguars and llamas and all these other things. So as I've said, the gold itself represented the sweat of Inti, represented the tears of Inti. So inside now this is where it gets interesting. So we're looking at this little building here as of a number of these buildings. Inside here, you can imagine that in the corners there's jars, and these jars are actually made of, my drawing's really bad. These jars are made of gold, golden jars, not earthenware jars, golden jars. And these golden jars contain precious stones and more of the sense of what they felt was precious. So obviously you've got all these precious stones in these jars. In one of these temples was also a representation of Inti, a golden hollow representation of Inti. And I believe this is a full-sized human representation of Inti. But then again, my notes later on tell me it's wrong, but it must have been quite a big representation, because inside the statue of Inti, or at least one of the statues of Inti, the sun god, they kept the vital organs of the Inca rulers and the ashes of the Inca rulers. It's said that this statue every day was taken out into the courtyard, and you can go through the door into the courtyard, and would be allowed to be displayed at the height of the sun, which would be about 12 o'clock. And the sun's rays would hit the statue and it would glow white. So in other words, what we've done, Jessica, we've got something gold which represents the sun. The sun produces the white texture, that, you know, the white sort of life that is humanity, and you know, the streaming white rays that we always see associated with the gods, not those yellow rays, but the white rays, because the light is created, and this is that sort of that embodiment. And okay, we're in the courtyard behind there. So if we clear that, we haven't got representation of courtyard because there's a bloody Catholic cathedral dumped in the middle of it. But what we do have, and that gives you an idea how big the area is, the garden of the temple was a wonderful conceived homage to Inti. And the reason why Anne said, is this a reconstruction? Up until about 50 years ago, this was hidden behind a brick wall. And somebody said, why are the walls of this cathedral about 5 or 6 meters thick? And they removed that wall, and then they realized that there was these little hidden temples because they hadn't got rid of them. So into the yard now, with just as land, sometimes entire regions were dedicated to the god Inti. So too, this garden was constructed to honor the great sun god Inti. Wait for it. Everything in it was made of gold and silver. A large field of corn, life size, so the corn itself is 1 meter in height at least, on stalks, golden stalks, and life-size models of shepherds in solid gold or silver, llamas, the same, jaguars, guinea pigs, monkeys, birds, loads of different birds, even butterflies and the many varieties of insects were all replicated and crafted in these precious metals. And if that wasn't enough to please Inti, there were also a large number of gold and silver jars, all encrusted with precious stones that I've mentioned. So in other words, the jars, you can imagine, the jars are actually used as terracotta. So it goes to show what the Inca saw the gold as representative to Inti. But then again, when you think about it, the gold, you know, there's loads of it. You know, it could be used for storing precious gems, for God's sake. And you're thinking, what? What I'd like to do is I would like to take us on a little bit of a story. So I'm gonna have to close my eyes for this one and remember it. About 10 years ago, I was listening to somebody describe what a Catholic priest thought about this building when he entered it. You know, these buildings. And he said that when Pizarro and his men entered Cusco, it said that a local priest from the temple of Coricancha went up to Pizarro and said, Pizarro, will you come with me and see our wonderful temple? And Pizarro thought, right, okay, it's going to be a wonderful temple, just like the ones in the Aztec kingdom. Right? So he wandered down these narrow streets, and this beautiful ashlar stonework made from the local basalt. And he went down, and suddenly, lo and behold, he saw the golden temple of Coricancha. And the priest says that you could go down onto the floor, and you could pick up golden nuggets. And the priest and Pizarro and his men were gobsmacked. So they opened the door, the golden doors, into the main precinct, and all around were these little temples. And they couldn't believe the color. It was all gold, because it was gold and silver. Anyway, Pizarro was by the Inti priest, by one of the sun god priests, said to Pizarro, "Come and see what we've got." And Pizarro was taken to one of the side temples, and there was the statue of Inti. And no sooner as Pizarro had entered the temple, Pizarro's men were wrenching the gold off the walls of the temple complex, and they were filling their pockets up with gold. And at that moment, it was no longer the tears of the sun god Inti. It was now the tears of Inti's priests that wept to see their own statue of their own god being smashed up by the men of Pizarro. It's said that the Catholic priest was horrified to see that the golden sheets were being ripped off the wall within the temple complex, and even the Catholic priest wept. The later history, the rather plain entrance doorway of the complex survives today with its typical double doors. The Christian monastery of Santo Domingo was built on top of the of the large complex, smack bang in the middle of the garden, no doubt in a deliberate attempt to signify that one religion had been replaced by another. Most of the gold from the site was, of course, melted into ingots and taken for the Spanish crown. Now, the star piece, the golden statue of Inti, being smashed up and crushed down, I've heard one reference that says that the statue of Inti was melted down and made into the Holy Cross, which is now at the altar within the Santo Domingo Christian monastery, which is directly on this site. Others say that, in fact, the story of the priests seeing the statue of Inti was wrong. In fact, what happened is that the priests grabbed the statue of Inti and ran off with it and hid it until 1572, where it disappeared without trace, probably being melted down like so many other Inca artifacts. But we don't know any more than that. Now, what I'd like to do, I'd like it to take us through the last journey. And it's quite sad to think that we in the West have presided upon a terrible history of conquest. And I don't think people really understand when they talk about the current issues. I don't really think they really understand the current issues, because it's not just, it's about humanity that's suffered. You know, humanity is the direct broadcast of all of what we see today in the sense of suffering. Today we're gonna look at this site, which is associated with the El Dorado myth. Now, what we have is, if anyone can read Spanish, you will see there that means the large lake beyond the Andes range. Now, anywhere along the Andes there, it's believed that El Dorado once existed. It's believed today that that archaeologists do believe that they've actually found where El Dorado is, and some say it's a site known as Vilcabamba. But back in the day, in the 1600s, it was still being broadcast that there was a golden city. With that, people from the Western world would go to find this mythical city, Petite El Dorado. But it's likely at that stage, by the 1600s, all the gold that was available within the old Incan kingdom was now gone. And it was almost as if they wanted people to settle there, because most of the land of the Inca was now empty of people. Most of the Inca were gone, dead, slaved. And it was almost as if I can go back to my notes to find the specific reference, if I can bear with me a minute. Anyway, is that the one? I seem to have lost the, oh, here we go. I seem to have lost my notes in regards to it. But if I can use my memory, seem to have lost my precise notes with it. But the point is that people from Europe were being asked to settle in the old land of the Inca, and there was a great deal of poverty, because when people went there expecting to find gold, they never found gold. And many people would go past the Andes range and would be lost beyond the Andes range. Many people would go beyond the Andes range to find El Dorado Petite and never return. Thousands and thousands of people have been lost. Many expeditions disappeared. And it goes to show that if people can be lost on expeditions, why didn't the same thing happen to Pizarro's army when he first entered the land of the Inca? And you start to think that there's, again, that raises a question. So what I'd like to do now is say that the expeditions to find Petite are still on. And in 2001, a document in the Vatican City was found, and the document in the Vatican City that was found was a report by a priest from the 1600s describing where this wonderful Petiti is to be found, and that from that moment onwards it gave gold fever. But archaeologists have been looking at this information from 2001, and as I said, do believe that they have actually found the location of Petiti. This itself is Machu Picchu. I had an opportunity to go to Machu Picchu years ago, but with life, I had the injections, I had the anti-rabies shots, malaria, cholera, meningitis, yellow fever, measles. I had so many drugs to get me out there. And unfortunately, what stopped me going is I got somebody pregnant and I had to stay behind. Now, if I hadn't have got them pregnant, if they hadn't have made me to get them pregnant in the first place, I would have gone to see Machu Picchu. It's terrible, isn't it, what women do to you, Jessica?
I'd be totally gutted.
I was
still
gutted.
would have gone.
I was gutted. I think it was a matter that I was meeting up with a friend of mine who was called Fernanda, and the thought of me being alone with her for months, I think, drove this other woman nuts. And
yeah, fair enough.
I never went to see Machu Picchu. I was really gutted. And Machu Picchu was what I was really interested in, and you know, these things happen. So what I would like to use Machu Picchu for is a point that we've developed throughout the week. Now, Machu Picchu was found by Hiram Bingham in 1911. And when Hiram Bingham found the site, he immediately overnight became the authority on the Incan civilization, which is not a good idea. Having a Westerner dictate to the Peruvians and the Chileans about their history is not a good idea. But Hiram Bingham's word has been used as gospel by many archaeologists and historians since. What Hiram Bingham said when he got there was that at the end of this valley, east of Cusco, was up in the gods there, 700 feet in altitude, was this lost city. And he said that this is where the Incas, this was where the last hideout of the Incas was. And he based this on the evidence that no records of the Spanish had been found to say that they got here. No evidence of the Spanish being here in the first place was his evidence to say that this was the last stronghold of the Inca. And the other point as well is that at this point, the Inca were starting to become impoverished in the sense that they didn't have any gold. So the Spanish wouldn't have been interested in them anyway, but the gold is not really a factor. But some people actually argue that this was one of the lost towns of the Inca, but it was not the last refuge of the Inca. It was not the Vilcabamba. It was not the place that they believed that the Inca last held out at in 1572. But because Hiram Bingham's work has been seen as gospel, Hiram Bingham said that he's the first person to ever find this site. You know, he was the one. In 400 years, nobody else had been to this site. You know, he was the one, except he wasn't telling us the truth. And what he wasn't telling us was that there were four families living at this site. So when he got to the site, he said, right, you can go now. So he turfed them all out. So when Westerners come there and said, oh my God, there's evidence that nobody's ever been here. Well, he could say that nobody had ever been here. But in fact, the villagers always knew this site was here. So they had been trying to protect it, but no Westerner had been to this site. Which is quite sad that you've got an archaeologist sort of making up history in a way. He never really found this site. It had always been known about. And there's talk that another Western archaeologist had found this site as well. Now, one thing I would like to ask you, Jessica, is your learned eye is as follows. Now, we've mentioned that this is a later Incan settlement. this was one of the later Incan settlements, but not the only last refuge of the Incan civilization. This was probably still in use in the 1270s when Vilcabamba was still in use. But notice the thatched roofs, okay? Fair enough, we're not going to discuss that. But notice the walls of these buildings are not like the earlier Incan civilization walls. What would that indicate to you, Jessica?
To me, it would it would show to me lack of manpower to be able to construct such a complex city as beforehand. Maybe showing them decreasing down to, like you said, disease.
Yeah, that's two sort of archaeologists coming to the same conclusion. This is what I actually felt myself. You know, it was, you know, when you're doing a lecture like this, you know, we're coming to the end of this lecture, about less than 10 minutes to go. The conclusions of it were that the Spanish and the Inca started to lack food to actually have big field armies anyway. Tropical disease would have wiped off the Spanish, but without any resistance from an Incan army, which was completely decimated by disease and civil war, their army would have been very scanty and spread about. Technology declined, that's the point you just made. The guns of the age would have been soon overcome by the Inca, and they would have soon learnt strategy to overcome the horse and the Spanish guns and so on. So those are some of the things that we looked at. Sort of coming to the end now, what we've got, it's likely that this was originally a complicated site because you can see the complicated ground plan. This is how regular this was. Coming up from the bottom of the valley, you can see as they're coming up from the bottom of the valley in through the Grand Gateway into this top terrace. And there's a hidden temple over this way as well. But when we look at a few images of this down on the ground, it's almost as if anyone wants to sort of take this on board, around the 1400s, they were still building in the mega way with the massive blocks. By 1450, they had honed in their skills with building really much smaller blocks, were able to deal with seismic activity. But by about 1500, that dip in the triangle where the society is just starting to go downhill because of this rapid conquest, what we're starting to see is by only 30 years later, by about 1530, that stage, buildings in the Incan world do not look as if they've got the stonemasons as they had before. They do not look as if they've got the manpower. So moving on again, you know, it gets very frustrating when it slowly moves on. What I'm going to do, oh, there we go. This is another ground plan. You can see the complexities. And the other thing as well is one point that was made earlier on. Again, how could you have big field armies out when most of the Incan civilization is built on terraces? They actually built on the terrace. Somebody said, what were the Incan temples like compared with the Aztec temples? So if you can think about, well, okay, temples were on a terrace. They weren't all stone-built pyramids in the middle of valleys and stuff like the Aztec civilization. But this was a terraced landscape. You can't have big battles on terraces. You've got to have, if you're going to have big battles, bring the men in, right, and the women. You need to have them in an open field, and that's what's not available to the battle strategy associated with the Spanish and the Inca. This is that Grand Gateway. You can see that stonework there. The gateway is interesting. It's probably from about the 1450s, but the other stonework there is much later. And what you can see on this sort of nice sort of reconstruction drawing, you can see all the earlier stonework here, the big blocks, and sort of big lintel and some of the big blocks here. But then the rest of the buildings are built with this poorer material. Somebody can argue, and I know somebody's shouting at the screen and saying, oh, that's how you build. You have the big blocks at the bottom and you have the smaller blocks at the top. Well, actually, Incan civilization, early Incan civilization, was that what you do find is that you have the big blocks at the bottom and you have the big blocks at the top. It's all big blocks, as we see, as we're going to come on to now. So just move that way out the way. We don't need that one. And come on, move. Well, wait for, oh, bingo, there you go. Now that's typical earlier Incan building. And do you see the difference between Machu Picchu and this, Jessica? It's a completely different world. And for Hiram Bingham to say that this is the last, he actually turned around and said, actually, this is the last hideout, Machu Picchu, of the entire Incan civilization. This is what he said, except he did actually find Vilcabamba and he dismissed it. He sort of said, oh, right, we'll dismiss Vilcabamba. And it's a bit of a shame, actually, because he was so close to actually finding out the secrets of Petiti and El Dorado and all these other places. So these are actually the very narrow trackways leading all the way across the 2,000 miles north to south of the Incan civilization. And bingo, this is at Machu Picchu. And can you see the point that you just made? And what we've got here, I want to zoom, if I can zoom in on this a bit. Actually, though, I'm actually cheating a little bit today. What the theories that I'm using today, I've had with me for some years, and it's actually the reason why I'm cheating is another archaeologist that was doing extensive work on Machu Picchu actually said, Hiram Bingham is talking crap, and he's also the clue to the collapse of the Incan civilization is actually in front of you. That is the evidence. That's what destroyed the Incan civilization there, because instead of what happened is Machu Picchu was probably destroyed in the Civil War, and then what happened is that they decided to rebuild it, but they couldn't really rebuild it like the way before. So they actually started a building this way. And again, this other archaeologist whose name I can't remember, he was saying that these are key, this is a key to what's going on. Not my opening statement, the Inca Empire came to an end when it was conquered by the Spanish Empire. And just a few more slides as we go on to. That is very different from this. You know, why, if you've got the personnel, why would you build like this when you can simply build like the chunky structure that we've already seen? So hang on, I just want to get my other slide to come up, but before we go on to that, this gets to the end. So what we're talking about is before the Inca are heading to places like Vilcabamba and Machu Picchu and south of the Incan world. What we have in 1537, the Spanish, this is when things start to change. The Spanish head towards the south, towards south of Cusco. They head south towards a site known as Ollantaytambo. And Ollantaytambo is the place that the Inca make a major stand against the Spanish. But this is building work from about the 1500s, not the latest shoddy rebuild, and not the earlier prominent build. But this is classed as the secret temple at Machu Picchu. So I'm just waiting for some of my slides to come up. We are now at a place known as Ollantaytambo. And believe me, I've been practicing all week to say these words and I still can't get them. Ollantaytambo. Ollantaytambo, if you look in the history books, is an amazing victory of the Inca over the Spanish, right? And strangely enough, we see it written down that there's 30,000 Incans versus 30,000 Spanish and their allies. And whoever wrote about this said that it was a major Incan victory. But they also tell us at Ollanta and Tayatambo, that the Incan army suffered a large number of casualties, even though they had defeated the Spanish-led army. And from this wonderful city at Ollanta Tayatambo, they had to abandon it. But there you go, Jessica. I'm not going to enlarge in this because it'll mess up with the connection. But you can see that that is one building there and another building. They're building on terraces as well as their agriculture. This is their civilization on the terraces. And we are now, they decided to abandon Ollanta Tayatambo and fall back to Vilcabamba. And nobody knew where this was. And even though Hiram Bingham actually found this site, it was only later on that archaeologists knew the importance. It was at Vilcabamba that the last Incan emperors reigned from, not Machu Picchu. It was at Vilcabamba that the Incas held on to power. It was at Vilcabamba in 1572 that the Incan Empire was more or less at an end. It lasted until 1620. But I'm going to give you one little secret at Vilcabamba as we finish. That's Hiram Bingham from 1911. This is one of those glass plates that you can see Hiram Bingham in his very interesting tropical gear. That could have been taken last week, but he ignored Vilcabamba for its archaeological qualities. And there is Vilcabamba, more towards the south of Peru, very close to the Andean range, and it was never captured or conquered by the Spanish. This is the last image. And the sad story about Vilcabamba, Jessica, is that overnight the site was abandoned. The Spanish never got there. There was no signs of the buildings being set alight. The whole town was abandoned. The whole city was abandoned. And the only thing that could really see the end to a civilization like this is a disease, a pandemic that wipes out the last of the Incan aristocracy and wipes out the last of Incan civilization. And strangely enough, being that the Spanish never ever got here, it may be true to say that the Spanish never ever defeated the Inca. It may be true to say, in my opening comments, that the Inca Empire did not come to an end because it was conquered by the Spanish Empire. Let's give them some respect. By 1572, the 3 water fountains in front of you that you can see stopped flowing their water. I said that the Incan world didn't collapse until 1620. It's likely 1 or 2 villages and towns continued on in the Inca way. But by 1620, no longer could people call themselves the Incan Empire. So what I'd like to do, I'd like to finish it there. I'd like to ask Jessica if you've got any questions or any statements, and then we'll put the mics on. So go for it.
I don't have any questions. I felt like it was a good lecture overall. I learned something new.
Good.
Yeah, it was very interesting to see.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I do feel like it probably was a disease that sort of saw the end to the Incas. Because,
you know, you would think that the Spanish would be looking for these towns and cities. You'd think that they would be continually wondering if they were full of gold. And it goes to show that the Inca were resisting the Spanish. And how they were resisting them is always going to remain a mystery. You never know, like the Zulu at Islandowana capturing British weapons at Islandowana, that centuries earlier, the Inca may have acquired some guns and were able to resist the Spanish. Or then again, the Inca resolved to those other weapons that they were using, Mother Nature. So what we're going to do, we're going to let the mics on. Everyone can have a say, and then we'll call it a day. So here we go. Let's put everybody's mics on. And remember, we've gone a little bit over today. So everyone put their mics on. Drina, anything that you would like to say about this today?
I love it when you can prove an argument against what we think we know. I mean, you think about it properly, and it's half of it's not true, and I like that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
It was a good lecture.
Thank you. Do you know, sometimes, so earlier on in Lantric Major, I had 13 people in Lantric Major, and I got to the end, now where I am now, and I said, can somebody please disagree with me? Can I just have somebody to tell me that I'm wrong? And everybody said, from what I was telling them and showing them, actually the archaeology is what tells you, not the history, it's the archaeology that tells you. I haven't said this, I haven't said the history tells you this and that and that and that and that. And I haven't said this is my opinion. I've said, look at the archaeology, this is what we see. Thank you, Drina. Bill.
I got 2 points. The first one, Carl, is actual building again, okay? As you know, I'm also interested in how things were built. And looking at what they did in building places like Machu Picchu and temples, etc., has to compare.
Bill, we've lost you a
the
minute.
Great Pyramids in Giza. At Giza, they had the luxury of what they were 5, 10 tons of terrain. It's mind-boggling how they did it, really is. The other thing is...
Bill, can I jump in there? So obviously the movement of stone and all the rest of it. There's one thing to say that when the Inca were building, say, on one side of the mountain, right, and they were having to clear it and flatten it out and all the rest of it, they may have brought the material from the other side of the mountain, and then when they brought that over, they would settle there. So, you know, you're thinking about not only what you've just said, they're talking about movement of stuff from over there to here. Because when you flattened and leveled out a site, you know, there's all these issues, and it makes it even more complicated. Bill.
The civil engineering aspect is absolutely phenomenal. It really is. The other thing to mention is that the number of Pizarro's men who actually reached the Incas must have been quite small. When you think about it, they had to sail across the Atlantic. The voyage must have resulted in some fatality, because long voyages always do. They landed on the east coast, Guyana, say. You had to trek over mountain ranges, through jungles, 1,500, 2,000 miles to get to present-day Peru in any case. So along the route, most of those would have succumbed through exhaustion, disease, and anything else. So I think the Incas probably, if they were in a fighting condition, would have had a good chance of resisting the small number of Pizarro's men who actually reached there, because it had to be a small number.
However, the Spanish got there, what you just said is dead right. You know, that is right. You know, so if you've got so if you reduce the Incan army to 200 men, right, then obviously up against cavalry and up against you know, they didn't stand a chance, and then you look at it more logically. But then again, if they had had the numbers, like we see at Adawa with the Ethiopians over the Italians, and what we're talking about, Bill, we're talking about warfare in the 1800s, far superior to warfare in the 1500s, right? So in other words, Pizarro's turning up with pop guns. They're not exactly, you know, that these are, they're what they're called. They're actually proper hand cannons, right? It takes a lot to load these things, and there's a lot of hassle, and the ammunition would have been the ammunition would have been damp, and all these other things, and you start to think there's something not quite right about the whole thing. Right, Henry.
I think I found that really interesting and also enlightening. Just on the construction, which is a point I agree with Bill on. When your slide about, I think it was third from the end, that showed the large blocks, there's some rationale there that it has to be cut with something, and because they're done so precisely. And then later on, it's quite clear they're just using field folders to just construct walls and buildings. So there's obviously clearly something going on there. And also that the landscape doesn't lend itself in the military sense to large scale battles anyway.
No.
It looks like more guerrilla warfare and skirmish. So armies might actually be relatively small.
Yes, yes, exactly. And to be honest with you, I worked out if you're gonna move an army of 100,000 from Cusco all the way to the north of the country, the soldiers would still be leaving Cusco when they actually got to the north. Okay, and that's the point. By the time they get there, the army's still in Cusco, so they've got to get all the way to the front, and it doesn't. And the baggage, the strategy, it makes no sense.
Yeah, and also the fact it's written by Jesuit priests as well, who wrote the history as well. So that would be a bit alarming.
Exactly. Right, Pat, and then we'll end with Anne's washing machine. Go on, Pat.
But what came to mind is that the history is always written by the winners. So that's a quote from somewhere or other. And I thought the lecture was fantastic because I have been there to Machu Picchu, but I didn't have your knowledge. So I'm going to go back and look at all my pictures and what I did see and didn't see. And yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much.
Many thanks. And do you know what I used to do years ago, right? Anne remembers this. I used to say to Anne, we're going to go to, on a Friday, we're going to take a group of like 2 or 3 people in the middle of a field. I would never read up on these things. And I would always come back and look at a book and say, oh my God, I was right about that. and the easiest thing in the world is to get a guidebook. And I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you've got a guidebook and you're going around the castle and you can't really work out what the bloody hell's going on because the guidebook and whatever. But if you go around the castle and not have a guidebook and then look at the guidebook afterwards, it's likely you understand it more, because when you've got a guidebook, it restrains you and it sort of chokes your neck. So, Anne, anything you would like to say before I do my closing statement?
I was glad to hear that the church had, respect for the civilization, and they'd kept they kept some of the remains, some of the ruins behind their cathedral, and also, it was good seeing the later building on top of these big stones, because it almost looked just like the buildings they make in the frontier, just sort of although they used to use wood usually, but so they almost look medieval,
Exactly, they'd gone back in technology. Do you know your point about the church had some respect. There were a couple of minutes in my lecture that did come through. The first one, that the Jesuit priests were horrified with what Pizarro's men were doing. That's the one point. Even though the church is occupied this temple site and Pizarro's men have removed all the gold and so on, there is a point. There is something in what you've said, i.e., the church is still respecting the boundaries and the precinct of the earlier temple. They haven't got rid of all of it. And that leads me to think that in a way, with what you've just said, there is a level of respect, even though it's not admitted.
Yeah, I think so. So a lot of priests are learned men, and they've studied all these things, and
exactly.
And they do have to respect, like the Romans, the Romans and the Christians, I suppose.
So what we're going to, thank you for that, Anne. So thank you for everybody making a contribution.
Could I just say one more thing? I can't remember who mentioned it, but it was the big man theory. I think Bingham was one of those people who wanted to sort of make that, look what I found, and sort of go down in history as, the great man history, great man theory of history. But I done a paper about Thomas Kahn, who wrote about the structure of scientific revolutions, who said that to actually find the truth about something is to sometimes not always trust the paradigms that we've been presented with in the past, and maybe question them to be able to find something new.
Yeah, I completely agree. My thesis thing was basically along similar lines, and the thing is, next week we're going to be looking at the fall of the Byzantine Empire, and it's not as black and white, the Byzantine Empire, as people think. They think that you've got this wonderful Christian bastion in the Eastern world on the border of the Muslim world, but the thing is, the Christians didn't respect Byzantium, Constantinople. They disrespected it. Christian didn't like the Christians at Constantinople, and you'll see all that next week. You'll also see that nobody came to the rescue of the Eastern Roman Empire, and you've got all these very strange things. And there's lots to be said about slavery next week, but it's also slavery is an umbrella term used for reconditioning, because lots of the Byzantines were converted to Christianity. Were converted to Islam, and they then become leaders in their own right. It's almost as if you'll see all that next week. You'll understand what I'm talking about next week. So it wasn't, the people of Constantinople weren't all enslaved by the Muslims. Lots of them.
Get on with me.
What's that?
Sorry, nothing.
Right. Anyway,
the Eastern Orthodox and the Muslim faith. Oh no, I was going to say something terrible then. No, I won't.
Keep it
right, then. So what we're going to do? We're going to keep that lecture till next week. If anyone wants to chat and have a chat at the end, Jessica, hopefully you'll join us tomorrow.
Yeah, definitely.
Right, so I will see you all next week. If anyone wants to chat at them, they can. Have you all enjoyed this today?
Yes.
Yeah. I look forward to the recording so I can listen to it again.
You will, and the banter in the break, which I didn't switch off. So anyway, thank you very much. Thanks for your support today. I'll see you next week, Henry and Pat, Jess, Adrina, and Bill. And remember, tomorrow we'll send you a link about the YouTube thing. And don't forget the forum next Wednesday. Thank you very much.
You. Bye.
Thank you, Anne, Henry,
Bye,
Bill,
everyone.
Jessica, and
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
I'm rather knackered now.
Go put your feet up.
You don't need to say anything. No.
No, I got a big nose.
The only thing I was thinking of was, no. I think we should take 1 week at a time.
Right.
1 week at a time, and it's difficult for people who've been in lockdown, like myself, who haven't been anywhere.
Shut up a minute. I know what you're talking about, and Pat's there. So the main thing is that right. I'm gonna stop the recording of this now.